The romantic relationship between a Professor Odagiri Susumu and his student Tokita Wakaba was exposed, so Wakaba was asked for an arranged marriage by her father. Kindaichi and Miyuki were invited to her wedding. Odagiri implores Kindaichi for going with. Wakaba's village is retired but very opulent, particularly the 6 completely Western-style buildings and the church shape a hexagram, the Star of David. In Wakaba's house, Kindaichi came across the headless mummy in a secret room. After finishing the ceremony, the bride Wakaba and the maid of honor, Kabuto Kariko went to the church. The rest of people took part in the party. Running to the church owing to the sound of its bell, they were numb with the headless corpse of the brides, Wakaba in the church which was completely locked inside. Since Wakaba's death, the 3 villagers were killed one by one. The frightening thing is the equivalence of the missing body part between their corpses and the mummies, the guardian gods in their houses. The only suspect, Kabuto Kariko, the bridesmaid, also becomes a lifeless body. The ruthless killer took her whole arm from the shoulder, which was cut off from the right shoulder to the left armpit. It is through the notebook Kindaichi surreptitiously took from the inspector. He knows the victim's time of death was between 10 p.m. and 12 p.m. 2 days ago, that is the same time as the first murder of the bride Wakada. The message of the 7th mummy says, "This is the second one, still not enough blood." It enables them to know the murderer killed Kabuto Kariko after Wakaba. Mr. Kazamatsuki finds out the difference between the removed body part of Kiriko's and the missing part of the mummy in her house. If Kiriko's arm was cut, the mummy lost the lower abdomen. The mummy without the left arm is in the tower house of Mrs. Goto Rands. Mrs. Goto is willing to show them to the mummy in her house. While Kindaichi and Mr. Kazamatsuki are looking into the mummy, Mrs. Goto lays her hands on Miyuki's shoulder to make a request for having some tea. Miyuki's hair stands on end. She thanks her, then runs in the basement. After looking over all of 6 mummies, Miyuki and Odagiri follow Kindaichi to see Mr. Tokita. As a result of his bad health, the servants and doctor try to stop Kindaichi to bother him. Kindaichi shouts that he wants to know the secret of the village. Mr. Tokita asks all of the servants and doctor to go out. Kindaichi comes straight to the point that he discovered the apple of Eden, which is the cannabis field in the prohibited area. The cannabis's dry leaves are the raw material of marijuana. Moreover, there are traces of treatment by a modern machine on the teeth of some mummies, inferring the mummies were created within the last few decades. Kindaichi emphasizes that they are not police, nor is it a curse. They just want to identify the culprit who killed their friend, Wakaba. Mr. Tokita bows his head in shame, tells the horrid past of the village 27 years ago. 100 years before, the missionaries had endowed the cannabis field. The owners of 6 mansions and the pastor of the church secretly continued to grow it. Therefore, they have obtained great wealth. However, the pastor suddenly asked them for getting rid of planting cannabis. His adopted daughters were 16 and 17 years old. They didn't want to have dirty money from the sinful act. Having failed to persuade him, they shot the couple of the pastor who tried to burn the cannabis field. They trapped 7 adopted daughters of the husband and wife pastor in the church to set fire to the church. After the fire, they returned to check. It was hair-raising that 7 mummies had a part of body cut off as if the devil had taken them all away. Being watchful against betrayal, each of them preserved a mummy. The 7th mummy had been enshrined in the basement of the chapel. To be immersed in thought, it has dawned on Kindaichi that the 7th mummy in the church was made of the parts which were cut off from the 6 mummies. That means 1 daughter out of 7 has been alive in revenge. Mr. Tokita takes them to the church. Shortly after opening the wooden coffin, they examine the mummy without the chest carefully. Nonetheless, Kindaichi and his friends can't find any marks of combination on. Kindaichi begins to lose his reckoning because of his false inference. Mr. Tokita is so panicky that he dies of a heart attack. The murder investigation comes to a dead end. What's worse is that the life of the 5th victim is accidentally lost as well. The Inspector Tawarada gets Kindaichi by the collar to ask what exactly resulted in Mr. Tokita's death. Kindaichi says mystifyingly that the god of death is liquidating the abhorrent past of the village. At the Vane Weather House, Mr. Kazamatsuki looks quietly at a necklace. He is heartrending to think of someone with the name Shiori. While Miyuki is unexpectedly drugged and captured, Kindaichi is in his room to gather his thoughts to search out the truth of the matter. The propelling pencil runs out off leads. Kindaichi roots around in his coat pocket for lead refills, but he takes out 2 photos of the tryst of the principal and the school committee president. An idea flashes into Kindaichi's mind. He phones the inspector Kenmochi in order to get Mr. Kenmochi to verify some information. In Tower House, Miyuki's hands are tied up. The witch Goto ravens for Miyuki's young beauty, her smooth, resilient skin, long black shimmering hair. Pulling Miyuki's shirt with wild laughter, she models herself on a wicked lady Elizabeth Báthory, a Hungarian. The woman bathed in the blood of virgins to retain her youth. Miyuki is in a panic owing to the death of the 2 young girls, Wakaba and Kariko, for the witch's sick mind. The witch Goto is dreaming of the everlasting beauty while taking a shower. Seeing a dark shape coming toward her in the mirror, her expression changes at once. A knife goes up, her eyes are wide with confusion and fear. Kindaichi has not seen Miyuki, so he gets worried to look for her. Kindaichi and Odagiri see Miyuki's handkerchief in front of her door and the track of something being dragged across the floor. Following the clues to the window, Kindaichi deduces that the abductor was not strong enough to carry Miyuki. She must have been a woman, her car parked outside the window. Furthermore, there is a mark of red paint on the window frame. It is surely Mrs. Gatu's the nail polish color. The column of thick black smoke can be seen curling up from Mr. Gatu's house. When Kindaichi and Odagiri arrive at the Tower House, everyone is gathering there. The fire is so furious that there is not a chance in hell of rescuing Mrs. Goto in the fire, whereas the firestrucks take them 1 hour to get. Kindaichi makes sure that Miyuki is still trapped inside. He rushes distractedly into the fire. The inspector and Odagiri run after him. The naked dead body of Mrs. Gatu's lying prone is scattered by the blazing red roses. Resembling the mummy in her house, her whole left arm from the right shoulder is cut off. The message of the culprit says, "To the 7th mummy, the most anguished cries are the most melodious lullabies." Miyuki swoons with smoke inhalation. After urgently untying and waking her up, they rush out of the burning building. Meanwhile, the bridegroom, Renju, is eyeing furtively. The house collapses completely as soon as they manage to get out of it. They cannot extinguish the fire until the following morning. Mrs. Goto Ran's corpse and the knife in Mr. Kabuto Raiji's collection are found in the ruins. Mr. Kabuto is arrested, hence the material evidence, but he will be released because he had an alibi in the first murder. In addition, such a cautious man like the culprit could leave the important evidence, the knife, at the scene. All of that are in the culprit's plan. The murderer is much gleeful when the preys live in fear. The series of murder mystery, Wakaba was killed in the church which locked inside. The only suspect, Kabuto Kariko, was murdered. The enigmatic mummies, the 7th mummy's identifier. Kindaichi goes down in defeat. In order to ward off a danger, Kindaichi requests Miyuki to go home first. Miyuki doesn't agree, but she recommends to sleep with Kindaichi as they were kids. Miyuki repeats the story of their childhood. Kindaichi took Miyuki's doll, which she cherished the most, and broke its limbs apart. Until Miyuki burnt into tears, Kindaichi tried his best to repair it, but the fixed doll had hands and feet upside down. Resemblance to the doll, it has dawned upon Kindaichi. He has solved the riddle of the 7 mummies and the alibi trick for the church case. Early the next morning, Miyuki comes after Kindaichi to the church. He finds out a crow feather stuck under a foot of the bed. It is from the bridesmaid's dress, Kuroko. Finally, Kindaichi cracks the case. The inspector, Tawarada, tosses Kindaichi a letter from Mr. Kenmochi. Kindaichi frowns at its contents. Kindaichi asks the inspector Tawarada for summoning all of the people who are involved in the case to the Weathervane house immediately, before the 7th mummy commits the last murder. The inspector tightens security around the Weathervane house at Kindaichi's request. Kindaichi sedately announces that he is going to uncover the hidden truth of the serial murder and the 7th mummy's identity. Firstly, the origin of the village's name, Rakaku, means hexagram, is from the network of canals, roads and 7 buildings, including 6 mansions and a church, which were built 100 years ago. The missionaries wanted to build an ideal country, the Eden Garden, which had a shape like the Star of David. However, they didn't have enough strong financial potential. Fortune smiled on them. The discovery of cannabis, which grew wild in a secluded village, gave them hope. They made a huge profit on cultivating and selling the plant. In other words, the village is created by trafficking in cannabis. After the missionaries returned to their country, the pastor with his wife and their 6 clans took over the cannabis field. 27 years ago, the pastor and his wife wanted to keep their hands clean. They decided to burn the whole field. They were shot dead by the 6 accomplices. Furthermore, the 6 cold-blooded killers shut the 7 remaining daughters of the pastor in the church to burn them alive. The 7 mummies, which were said to be village guardian gods, are actually the 7 adopted daughters of the pastor. Some teeth of the mummies had got the post-treatment traces by a modern machine, so they are not centuries old. Besides, Kindaichi saw the cannabis field with his own eyes. It is not the whole story. In fact, there were 6 girls who lost their lives in the Great Fire, not 7 ones. In order to revive the refinement of the only survivor, Kindaichi carries out on 7 dolls. Cut off the head of the first dolls, cut the second doll from the right shoulder to the left armpit. Remove the third doll's chest, the fourth doll's hip, the fifth doll's right leg and the sixth doll's left leg. Like the dolls, all mummies were cut into 2 parts. The next step is to arrange the parts of the 6 dolls. Take away the first doll's head, that creates a headless doll. To substitute the second doll's head with left arm for the first doll's head, that creates a doll without a left arm from the shoulder. To substitute the third doll's upper part for the second doll's head with left arm, that creates a missing right shoulder doll. To replace the fourth doll's part from the waist with the third doll's upper body part, that creates a mummy without the upper abdomen. Finally, put the fourth doll's upper part, the fifth doll's right leg and the sixth doll's left leg together, that creates a missing bottom mummy. There is an intact doll. Similarly, the only girl survived. She witnessed the slaughter with her own family. She had a profound hatred that is the cause of the serial murder in the village. The alter ego of her have make the revenge plan. The personification of her hatred, the 7th mummy, is in the room. The horrible crime happened 27 years ago. There was a survivor in the Sea of Fire. The culprit, who has inherited her vengeful spirit, is among them now. Nobody left the wedding party in the first murder case of the bride Wakaba, except Wakaba and the bridesmaid Kiriko Kabuto. After hearing the sound of the church bell, all of people left the party, ran quickly to the church together. The church locked inside, the door was jerked open by Odagiri's car. Wakaba's dead body without the head was on the bed, and later Kiriko Kabuto's head was found out inside the head of an armored knight. The 7th mummy left a message on the suit of the armor that implied Kiriko as the second victim after Wakaba. But in fact, the first person who was killed was Kiriko, not Wakaba. The headless body in the church was Kiriko. Wakaba probably persuaded Kiriko to exchange dresses and replaced her position for some hours. She wanted to see someone the last time. Therefore, Kiriko wore Wakaba's wedding dress, locked the doors and windows, then laid in the bed. Observing Kiriko from the skylight, Wakaba waited for Kiriko to close her eyes. She tied one end of the string to a cloth which was chloroformed, slowly lowered the cloth to cover up Kiriko's face. When Kiriko fell asleep, Wakaba pulled the bed up by 4 ropes with hooks and a pulley which was fixed in the church belfry. After having reeled the rope off the drum in Odagiri's car, Wakaba made good use of the drum to have a makeshift pulley. Thus, she lifted the entire bed to the skylight and severed Kiriko's head with a sharp pair of scissors. It was easy to take Kiriko's head through the skylight. The crow feather from Kiriko's dress was found out under a foot of the bed that proves the bed had been lifted up at some point. The forensic examination confirmed the headless body in the wedding dress to be Wakaba. It is because the culprit came back to swap the 2 bodies. The 7th mummy asked Wakaba to ring the church bell after the perfect crime, thus he had a solid alibi. While all of people managed to open the church door, he sneaked away to see Wakaba and killed her. Therefore, the death time of Wakaba and Kiriko are similar. Waiting for everyone to go home, he carried the Wakaba's body to the church, exchanged Wakaba's dead body for Kiriko's. Finally, he cut Wakaba's head off, then brought Kiriko's dead body and Wakaba's head with him. Kindaichi could realize the refinement of cruelty due to the difference of the missing part between Kiriko's corpse and the mummy in her house. If the mummy lost the lower abdomen, Kiriko lost her left arm from the right shoulder. Firstly, the culprit created the resemblance of the missing part between the victims' corpses and the mummies in their houses. Secondly, the change of Kiriko's corpse is not a mistake. The culprit had to do that because Kiriko's head was cut by Wakaba before. Thirdly, the message on armor in Kiriko's house implied that Kiriko to be the second victim. Nobody questioned his swap. In summary, all of those things made sure his alibi is solider. As Mr. Junya has been experienced in hunting and making specimens, so he has thorough knowledge of bones, muscle, joint. It was Mr. Junya who joined the mummy parts of 6 daughters to turn into 7 ones. Mr. Junya admits in his quavering voice that he did that in order to save Shiori. When he snuck back to the church, expect Shiori, all of the girls died from smoke inhalation. After taking Shiori to the hospital at the foot of the mountain, he got worried that his accomplices would count the mummies. Therefore, he came up with the idea of cutting and joining the mummy parts from the Star of David and their symbol without an acute angle. However, the girl was rescued, completely disappeared, she escaped from hospital. Kindaichi throws the intact doll towards Odagiri with a thud. He accuses Odagiri of being the 7th mummy. Odagiri gives a strong denial of the charge. He diverts the doubt to the bridegroom, Renju, on account of Wakaba's money. Unexpectedly, Kindaichi calls Odagiri another name, Rukosei Ryuichi. For vengeance purpose, he had learned about the village, the mummies in their basements. He is clear the village custom that every bride would be alone in the church for the wedding night. He also knew Wakaba's marriage had been arranged by her dad after finishing high school. Rukosei impersonated Odagiri, a professor in Fudo High School, as to approach Wakaba. According to his plan, it was supposed to be after Wakaba's graduation. Nevertheless, the discovery of the real Odagiri's skeleton a few months ago constrained him to expedite the plan. It was Rukosei that took Odagiri's life to replace him. By spreading the illicit affair between a teacher and a student, he succeeded in speeding up Wakaba's arranged wedding. Comparing 2 photographs of Wakaba's and the school principal which were in front of the hotel reveals the difference. Both the principal and the student committee turned their eyes on the camera because of the flash from it. As to Wakaba's photo, there was only the fake Odagiri looked straight into the camera. Wakaba didn't know the presence of the camera. Without the flash, Rukosei still looked towards the camera, because he was the schemer. His camera might be operated by a remote control. Moreover, the accident outside the church was contrived. Rokasei unscrewed all of the screws in the holder of the cross, tied the last loosened screw to the fishing line, and tied the other end to the church door. He deliberately walked behind Kindaichi and Miyuki to pull the line. The last screw came off, the cross fell down. Kindaichi got the inspector Kenmochi to investigate Rokasei's status. None of Odagiri's family knew Rokasei. Besides, the result of forensic test, the skeleton was Odagiri's. Rokasei has buried his face in his hands all the time to hide his feelings. At the moment, the truth comes out. He gives a devilish smile on Kindaichi. He kicks the desk to everyone. After fighting on all sides, he gives the policeman fits. Miyuki is taken hostage. Rokasei was born in revenge. His mum, Shiori, was presumed dead, didn't have any identification, so she couldn't look for a stable job. Having lived in misery and want, his mum constantly reminded him to take revenge for their miserable life, his 6 aunts' deaths, and the burns on his mother's face and body. In order to train her son Rokasei to be a ruthless killer, she encouraged him to stab a knife into her. Since that day, he was reborn to be a killing machine, the merciless 7th mummy. As for him, killing human is as easy as killing a cockroach. Apart from establishing his alibi for the time of the crime in the church, the rest of the things were favorable. The bastard Torao was all in a tremble when knowing Rokasei to be Shiori's son and begged for quarter. Rokasei smiles with great satisfaction. However, he was disappointed with the feeble protest of the 2 women, the cat lady Kusanagi and the witch Goto Ran. He spares Mr. Junya's life at his mum's request, but Mr. Kabuto is not so lucky. Rokasei points the gun at Mr. Kabuto, pulls the trigger. Sending Mr. Kanuto to hell, Rokasei races Miyuki along, fires off a few warning shots to prevent from the pursuit of police. The inspector orders his men to call for backup. Rokasei drags Miyuki to the marijuana field. While he is sprinkling the cannabis with petrol, Miyuki asks whether he killed Wakaba. He phlegmatically admits his guilt. He even makes a mock of the starry-eyed girl, Wakaba. Getting angry at his hard heart, Miyuki intends to beat him with a stick, but he quickly fends off it and knocks her away. When he is about to kill her, the bridegroom Renju all at once runs at Rokasei with a knife which enters Rokasei's belly. He is so exasperated that pushes Renju back and follows up with a shot. The dying man just says to Miyuki that she looks like Wakaba. The sound of the shot reveals their position accidentally. Kindaichi runs to attack Rokuse, tries to wrest the gun from Rokuse's grasp, but Kindaichi is not successful and is shot. Kindaichi is bent double, holding his belly in pain. Miyuki goes so crazy that she is careless of her life, throws herself towards Rokuse to hit him constantly. Although Miyuki is pushed down by Rokuse, she dares him to kill her. Kindaichi stops Rokuse from hurting Miyuki. When Rokuse points the gun at Kindaichi said to him that the 6 cruel people in the village deserved death. But why he could kill Wakaba, who did everything for her love? Kindaichi asks him with indignation if Rokuse felt the slightest bit of remorse when he cut her head off by his own hands, which were splashed with her blood. At the moment, Rokuse admits to feeling remorse when killing the poor girl, Wakaba, who gave up everything for such a useless man like him. The bitter tears roll over his cheeks. Kindaichi remembers Rokuse wept by himself in his sleeping room. That means the bloody Rokuse loves Wakaba. When the police arrives, there is a gunshot from Mr. Junya. He calls Rokuse to be his son. Mrs. Shiori and Mr. Junya promise to each other of a happy family, and their son's name being Ryuichi. He shows their pact, which looks like Rokuse's necklace. Rekuse Ryuichi has tears in his eyes. It is hard to believe that he has not been isolated in the icy world. My Junya unexpectedly points the gun at everyone, orders them to step back. He is going to be done what his son is unfinished. The accumulated wealth of them from marijuana trafficking. Mr. Junya has been so guilt-ridden for 27 years. After burning down the marijuana field, the burden of guilt has been lifted from his shoulders. Mr. Junya thanks Kindaichi and opens fire on himself. So much blood is lost that Kindaichi becomes pale and unconscious. The inspector and another policeman carry Kindaichi and Renju on their backs to escape from the ferocious fire demon. Having burned all night long, the marijuana field has completely burnt down. The murky past of the village will be buried forever. During being a coma at the hospital for 2 days, Kindaichi has a dream that Mr. Junya gets married with Mrs. Shiori. Ryuichi is the crystallization of their love. Ryuichi meets Wakaba. The girl is from a small village. They fall in love each other and live together happily forever and ever. Coming out of the coma, Kindaichi is pleased with the inspector's visit. The inspector tells Kindaichi and Miyuki some bad news. Renju was injured so seriously that he died the previous day. Surprisingly, Renju soon suspected Ryuichi because he saw Ryuichi slunk in the church on the night of the first murder. Renju was introverted. He always shut himself up in his house, but he gave his heart to Wakaba through her photographs. After having ascertained that Ryuichi was the culprit, Renju followed Ryuichi into the forest as to revenge Wakaba. The result of forensic examination proves that Kariko is the first victim who was killed in the church. The weapon and missing body parts were found in the cemetery behind the church. All of body parts were dumped like trash, whereas Wakaba's head was buried under a stone near the mountain peak surrounded by beautiful scenery. Seeing Kindaichi and Miyuki off at the station, the inspector tells Kindaichi some strange things relating to the case that makes Kindaichi deep in thought. Like the detective Kenmochi, the inspector Tawarada looks in silent admiration at Kindaichi. Kindaichi says to Miyuki that Wakaba had known to be killed by Ryuichi. That was why the police found no mark of her struggle in her nails when she was strangled. Judging from conditioned reflex of a normal person, a victim will scratch the culprit when he chokes the life out of the victim. The murderer's DNA will be found in the victim's nails. In a few moments, Wakaba was killed by the man whom she loved passionately. She accepted death for him. Kindaichi pretends to cry for his wound to have his arms around her waist. Miyuki gets so angry that she punches him in the wound of his gut. In the photograph, Ryuichi and Wakaba were holding tight to each other's hands. However, their love was not strong enough to win their tragic destinies.